On June 6, 1944, the Allied landings at Normandy beach achieved a tenuous foothold in Nazi-occupied Europe. Yet, within days, the great armoured advance envisioned by planners had shuddered to a halt, not by German panzers or heavy artillery, but by an ancient and unassuming feature of the French countryside, the Norman hedgerow. These were not simple garden hedges. For centuries, farmers had built these barriers, constructing massive earthen walls up to 15 feet high, thick with tangled roots and stone. They formed an immense labyrinthine fortress that covered the landscape, dividing the land into thousands of isolated, deadly kill boxes. For the American Sherman tanks, these hedgerows became death traps. The standard tactic of climbing over them exposed the tank's thin underside armour to waiting German soldiers armed with Panzerfausts. The result was predictable and devastating. A single shot, a catastrophic explosion, and a burned-out hull with a crew that rarely escaped. Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron witnessed this nightmare daily. He saw confident advances stall as tanks were systematically destroyed one by one. The Allied push inland, expected to cover miles, was now measured in yards, and the cost in men and machines was becoming unsustainable. Culin was a mechanic from New Jersey, a man who understood machines, force, and practical solutions. As he watched another Sherman erupt in flames, a radical idea formed. The problem wasn't the hedgerows themselves, but the tactic of going over them. The solution was to go through. The challenge was immense. How could a tank breach centuries of compacted earth and root systems? Culin began sketching in his notebook, envisioning a set of steel tusks mounted on the tank's front, designed to dig into the hedgerow's base and rip it apart from the ground up, allowing the tank to pass through without exposing its vulnerable belly. His crewmates met his idea with affectionate skepticism, but Culin understood that every good mechanic is a problem solver. The hedgerow was merely a stubborn piece of machinery that needed the right tool to persuade it. He needed scrap metal, a welding torch, and permission from a commanding officer willing to take a risk. Culin presented his audacious plan to Captain Samuel Morrison: take a damaged Sherman, weld steel prongs to its front, and drive it headlong into a hedgerow. Morrison recognized the sheer madness of the proposal, but he also saw the undeniable logic. Keeping the tank's frontal armour facing the enemy was tactically sound. He granted Culin 48 hours. The beaches of Normandy, still littered with the detritus of the D-Day landings, became Cullin's salvage yard. He and his crew scavenged German Czech hedgehogs, jagged anti-tank obstacles made of hardened steel, and cut them apart with torches. They shaped the beams into 4-foot-long sharp-tipped prongs. Working through the night, they carefully welded these formidable teeth to the front of a Sherman tank. The final creation was a bizarre sight. A standard M4 tank now resembled a mechanical prehistoric beast, its steel tusks poised to challenge the ancient Norman landscape. At dawn, a crowd of skeptical soldiers and officers gathered to witness the test. The modified tank, nicknamed Rhinoceros, charged a formidable hedgerow. The impact was thunderous, with the sound of tearing roots and the tank's engine roaring in protest. For a tense moment it seemed stuck, but then it powered through, emerging unscathed on the other side with a clean breach in its wake. The test was a success, but the true trial was combat. Culin volunteered to ride as a technical advisor when the Rhinoceros was assigned to assault a German strongpoint that had resisted attacks for 3 days. The plan was for it to lead, breaching hedgerows so infantry could follow through the gaps and overwhelm the defenders. As the tank approached the first hedgerow, the crew braced for impact. It struck with a jarring crash, but the prongs held and the Sherman tore through the earthen wall. They emerged directly in front of a shocked German machine gun crew, which was swiftly eliminated by the tank's main gun before it could react. Hedgerow after hedgerow fell to the Rhinoceros. The accompanying infantry, ecstatic at the sudden reversal of fortune, poured through the breaches and cleared enemy positions that had seemed impregnable just hours before. Cullin's invention was proving its worth under fire. The ultimate test came when intelligence reported a German Panther tank, a far superior machine, lying in wait behind a massive hedgerow. Instead of retreating, Culin ordered the crew to breach directly toward it. The Sherman crashed through, and the gunner, having kept his weapon trained on the predicted location, fired first, striking the Panther's weaker side armour and disabling it. The combat success was immediate and undeniable. News of the Rhinoceros travelled quickly up the chain of command. Captain Morrison informed Culin that General Omar Bradley himself had taken notice and wanted 5,000 of these Culin hedgerow cutters manufactured immediately. Culin was pulled from his unit and placed in charge of a massive modification effort. Welding teams worked around the clock at depots across Normandy, using scavenged steel to arm the Allied armoured fleet. Culin travelled from site to site, training crews on the precise angles and welding techniques needed for the cutters to function properly. General Bradley visited a modification site and personally commended Culin, recommending him for the Legion of Merit and a promotion. The simple field modification was on its way to becoming a standardized piece of military equipment, fundamentally changing tank doctrine in the European theatre. As the cutters saw widespread use, their impact was transformative. The Allies could now advance on their own terms, bypassing German killing zones. The bloody yard-by-yard fighting was replaced by a fluid offensive that broke the stalemate and allowed American forces to finally burst out of the Normandy hedgerows. The invention's success, however, came with a moral weight. Culin grappled with the fact that his tool, while saving Allied lives, had also made killing the enemy more efficient. He confided in his comrades and a chaplain, struggling with the complex calculus of wartime innovation. His friend, Private Kowalski, offered a soldier's perspective. The cutters shortened the war, and every day the war was shorter, lives on all sides were saved. The invention was a weapon, but its ultimate effect was to reduce the overall suffering. The ingenuity of the soldiers in the field further refined Culin's design. Crews added extra prongs, serrated edges and debris-clearing mechanisms. Culin welcomed these improvements, believing the best ideas came from those using the equipment under combat conditions. The German army was initially baffled, then desperate. Their defensive schemes, built around the impregnability of the hedgerows, were rendered obsolete. They tried mining the hedges and repositioning guns, but they could not counter the fundamental tactical shift the cutters enabled. As the war moved out of Normandy and into more open country, tankers discovered new uses for the cutters. They smashed through urban barricades, provided traction on muddy riverbanks, ploughed through snowdrifts, and even cleared roadblocks of fallen trees during the Battle of the Bulge. The US military formally integrated the design, and new Sherman tanks began rolling off production lines in the United States, with pre-fitted attachment points for the cutters. Culin's field expedient had permanently influenced American tank design. With the end of the war in Europe, Culin stood among the celebrations as a quiet, conflicted hero. His invention was credited with shortening the Normandy campaign by weeks, saving countless lives, and becoming one of the most significant tactical innovations of the war. He returned to New Jersey after the war, shunning the spotlight and returning to his life as a mechanic. He rarely spoke of his wartime achievements, preferring to focus on building and fixing in peace, rather than on what he had helped break in war. Decades later, when tracked down by a historian, Culin deflected praise. He insisted he was not a genius, merely a problem solver who was given a chance. The real lesson, he argued, was that the army had been willing to listen to a good idea, regardless of its source. Culin's story is a powerful testament to practical ingenuity overcoming entrenched obstacles. It highlights how a simple, elegant solution can defeat a complex problem when theory and tradition have failed. The environment of Normandy itself was a silent, formidable adversary. The Allies had prepared for the Atlantic Wall, but the Bocage country presented a tactical puzzle for which they were unprepared, requiring an adaptive, on-the-ground solution. Culin's background as a mechanic was crucial. His hands-on understanding of force, leverage, and machinery allowed him to see a solution that theoretical engineers had missed. It was the triumph of practical experience over pure academia. The leadership demonstrated by Captain Morrison was a critical enabler. His willingness to approve a seemingly insane idea, risking his own career, underscores the importance of command trust and flexibility in fostering innovation, especially in desperate situations. The rapid implementation and scaling of the cutter idea reveal the impressive logistical and industrial might of the US military. Transforming a prototype made from beach scrap into thousands of standardized units in a matter of weeks was a monumental achievement. The cutter fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of the battle. It restored the offensive initiative to the Allies and instilled confidence in the tank crews, while creating confusion and demoralization among German defenders who had felt secure behind their natural walls. The invention's evolution through user feedback is a classic example of iterative design. The soldiers who used the cutters in combat provided the practical insights that refined and improved the original concept, making it more effective and versatile. Cullen's personal journey from an anonymous sergeant to a decorated innovator and back to a quiet civilian reflects the complex relationship many veterans have with their service. He carried the pride of his contribution alongside the sobering knowledge of its purpose. The Culin cutter serves as a lasting case study in military doctrine, demonstrating how a single piece of technology can render existing enemy tactics obsolete and force a complete reassessment of battlefield strategy. The story transcends its military context to offer a universal lesson about innovation. Breakthrough ideas often come from those closest to the problem, and organizational success depends on creating channels for those ideas to be heard and tested. The legacy of the hedgerow cutter is preserved in museums where Sherman stand with their steel tusks still attached. They serve as silent monuments to the ingenuity that, in the face of a stalled and bloody campaign, found a way to break through. Cullen's post-war humility adds a profound human dimension to the story. His belief that he was just one of many with good ideas highlights the collective, often anonymous, nature of innovation and the importance of a culture that empowers its people to create. Ultimately, the story of Sergeant Culin is not just about a device that cut through hedges. It is about a mindset that cuts through conventional thinking, proving that determination coupled with practical skill can change the course of history. The broken tank, the mad mechanic, and the simple, brilliant invention stand as an enduring reminder that the solution to an impossible problem often lies not in waiting for a miracle, but in picking up a torch and building the answer yourself.